Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Happy holidays. So this is going to be the last video of this year. There'll be more next year, don't worry, but just for this year, this is the last one. So we're coming up on about 4 years now of this XM177 by WE. I've gotten this back in November of 2016 for a total of $232 shipped. So that was a very good steal right there. So now that it's been 4 years, let's give this Select Fire Gas Blowback rifle a review and see how it's performed after all those years, after 10,000 rounds. So the full video or the full review would be way too long to do in one video, so I'm going to try to make it no more than 20 to 30 minutes. A lot of the in-depth stuff we've covered in different videos, or will make a video for at one point or another to do it better justice. So for now, let's just keep it to the basics. What we're just going to talk about is just the FPS, the performance of the gun, and then the quality of itself, the build, the historical accuracy, parts, things like that, and then we'll wrap it up at the end about what the final impressions are. We're going to try to go from head to front, front to back, and then go into all the details that might be interesting. So first off, if we're going to talk about FPS, I did an entire video on this about a month ago regarding the in-depth performance of this, so I won't bore you all with that. You can check out that video later on. In a nutshell, it's about 400 to 430 FPS, regardless of whether it's a 220 round or 30 round magazine, if you're using propane or green gas. If you were to use a CO2 magazine, which this gun does accept, you can push it up towards a 500 FPS. Not much more to say about that though. Now, right out of the box, I never really recorded the accuracy, so I just didn't know what it was back then. And of course, there are multiple things that affect the gun's accuracy, but of course, barrel length is one of them, as we found out in one of our videos. Back then, in this original configuration, it was about a 14.5-inch barrel from barrel to the end. Of course, since then I've removed and cut down the inner barrel from this 14.5-inch to basically this 10-inch barrel, inner barrel. Now, occasionally though, I do run it with the original XM177 moderator, like as in this picture right here, where although the inner barrel isn't really fully extended, there's still some of that protection from the moderator out in the front, so it still helps accuracy to some extent. But again, accuracy is not going to be relevant to the original, and so we just don't know. Sometimes, of course, though, I like to run it in the true 10.5-inch, maybe 11-inch configuration with just the A2 flash hider in front. So accuracy comparison, doing accuracy tests today will be different from when you get it from the original box. One of the things you'll notice is that as this gun ages, the barrel starts flexing. This is because the rubber O-ring that's used as a crush washer to stabilize the barrel gets damaged. You can always fix this, but if you don't, it will affect your accuracy. Not so much in semi-auto because the round will leave the barrel before the recoil happens, but assuming you can realign your gun with your target, it won't be an issue. It only becomes an issue though on fully automatic fire, when you'll notice that rounds starts drifting off target because of the recoil and the barrel flexing, like this picture right here. But that's something to note that happens after about a couple thousand, maybe like 5,000 rounds, it becomes an issue. In this next segment, I misread the distance to the target. So with my red dot being zeroed for 20 feet, I end up, and the target actually being 25 feet away, I end up shooting, my point of impact was shifted upward a little bit. So that's really on my part. I also wasn't shooting with any support to stabilize the gun. I was in the prone position, but not with any support. So accuracy and groupings would be a lot better. But this gives you a rough estimate of how it performs on a day-to-day basis. This is in semi-auto mode right here. As you can see, first shot probably missed. Then you start getting this, start seeing points of aim right there. Again, the point of impact was shifted. That could have been easily corrected if I just gauged the distance more correctly. So if you exclude those flyer rounds that I probably shot high, this ended up on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That was probably about a 4-inch grouping right there. Let's see how it does on full auto. So obviously at 25 feet again, the full automatic fire increased the grouping size to about 6-7 inches apart. These are pretty bad results, but keep in mind though that the barrel is much shorter. There's a lot of barrel wobble in an age system like this at this point, if you were to pick up a gun brand new out of the box, you are not going to have this short barrel issue. You're not going to have this barrel wobble, and so the accuracy, especially if you were firing from a supported position, you would have a much better grouping. So keep that in mind. Don't let that fool you. That was just kind of an estimate of what we're at right now. Now, because I don't have the original images of how this gun would have fired out of the box, I imagine there wouldn't be any barrel wobble because the O-ring is still intact, but I don't know if that for sure. But I would imagine it would be kind of like this Marui right here. So again, this is the Marui. This is a brand new Marui. There isn't any barrel wobble because this is a new system, but I would imagine it would be very similar to this if it were the case, brand new. Now, as far as the range of this gun, that gets kind of debatable. I don't have the best range to determine that distance right now, but from what I can tell, about 150, 120 to 150 is a pretty good range. I don't want to get into the whole definition of what's considered a maximum effective range because everyone kind of defines that differently. So when I say 120 to 150, that means most of the time you can probably hit like a man-sized silhouette target at that distance reasonably. So let's get into the quality of the build, and we're talking about parts and how long it lasts, and which parts will break or needs to be replaced. I am a huge fan of these AR platforms guns, this XM177, this vintage Vietnam era style, and any other M4 series really. But there will be parts that break, and so let's go through some of them. And some parts actually are surprising to me, have lasted a really long time. So let me go through what's the good and the bad. One of the first things you'll probably end up noticing is that, and again, this could just be unique to my version, but on fully automatic fire, this gun has a tendency to jam. And what happens is that a round, instead of getting properly pushed out of the magazine and fed onto the loading ramp and into the chamber and into the barrel of the gun, it pops out of the chamber, or sorry, pops into the locking recesses, as you can see in this picture here. So a round will get, the white BB right there gets jammed in there. And when the bolt cycles back and slams forward, the locking lugs, which is basically the bolt face, smashes that round further and further into the locking lugs. And so remember that bolt face, which is basically just your loading nozzle, is a very soft plastic, right? So it will get damaged and broken, as you can see in this picture here. Um, Fortunately, though, that's just the bolt face itself is just the locking lugs on the bolt face is just a cosmetic thing, right? You don't really need those locking lugs to lock into place to fire like the real steel. You don't have to go completely into battery in order to fire it. But it still looks kind of annoying to have an M4 without the bolt face, you know. So that's something that's optional, and you don't have to change it if you don't want to. The gun will still continue to work, but it is something that tends to happen after a while. And if it doesn't jam on you, eventually the bolt face does crack, though. Fortunately, the nozzle doesn't, but the bolt face does. This next one is going to be a very annoying problem for many of you folks. The WE, the infamous WE magazine bolt catch problem. When I first got this gun, this was actually straight out of the box a problem. It would not lock back on the last round and on an empty magazine. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there which try to teach you how to fix this, but there are a lot of problems associated with it. There are different ways to approach it, and you just kind of have to try to figure out what it is. Is it an issue where you have to fix the stock tube extension to give it more travel time? Do you have to, is your bolt already worn out? Is your bolt catch not securely in place? There's a lot of issues, but if you once you get that resolved, after a while the bolt catches right here, as you can see, they get worn out too. So you compare them side by side, you'll notice that they end up getting worn out. And this is something that actually gets worn out. I mean, it depends on how often you use it, though. If you say, but I say after about 5,000 rounds, or basically after you depress the bolt about 200 times, you'll notice that it starts wearing out. Sometimes you have to replace the bolt face, or sorry, the bolt itself where it catches and bites onto it, and sometimes you have to replace the bolt catch itself if it's still a problem. But those are the areas you have to look for, and that's a very common situation that happens. Now, I've already touched on this when we were talking about the accuracy. It's the barrel wobble issue. So after about 5,000 rounds, the O-ring that's attached to the end of the barrel and serves as a crush washer inside of the delta ring gets worn out. You could replace it with a copper wire, like this picture here. And I've actually made an entire video of kind of a more permanent solution, quote unquote. But after about a year or so, I've kind of had the feeling that it's best to really find the original O-ring to attach to the end of the barrel. The problem is I just don't know what that dimension of the O-ring is, and I really have to continue to guess to see what the original O-ring dimensions are. Um, because that really provides the best snugged fit that will fix the barrel wobble problem. I don't think that's a big issue. It's just kind of a guessing game to see what is that dimension, since of course WE does not reveal what those dimensions are. But once I think someone can find out what those are, that's going to be a simple fix. Now, if you punch in closely, you'll notice that the XM177 moderator, or some call it the flash hider, is essentially attached right next to the front sight post right there. That's, again, after I've modified it and chopped off parts of the barrel. Remember, originally out of the box, it looks something like this. There's a small piece of barrel extension right there. Now, unfortunately, though, the barrel extension is very, very weak, and it's attached to, it looks like this right here, and the moderator that attaches to this piece is very, very heavy. So as you can see, after thousands and thousands of rounds, you'll start noticing that piece starts cracking. And if you don't remove it, it will break off. So that's unfortunately a very tough part to find and replace. But good news though is there's always that modification. So watch my video on that. You can always fix it and just have a short barrel system. But again, if you want to keep that, original 14.5-inch barrel, that might be kind of tough after a while, especially since how heavy that moderator is. It will put a lot of stress on that tiny connector piece. They really should have done a better job of making a better material to support that segment there. But again, like I said, no big deal. After the modification, you can still have a piece that still looks pretty good. The other major thing that I noticed will basically inevitably fail is the trigger pack group. You'll know that this becomes a problem when you can't seem to keep your gun on semi-auto only when the selector switch is on the semi-auto mode. There's a quick mod out there that you can find to slow this degradation process and prevent you and buy you more time before you have to buy a new platform or a new trigger box or trigger pack essentially. But in the end, you'll probably have to switch it. And it's probably best to switch it anyway. But after about like 5,000 or more rounds, you end up basically needing to replace this. Otherwise, your gun ultimately ends up staying on full automatic or burst mode, and you just can't control the rate of fire as you intended. So this is a quick clip you may have seen already. One part that's cosmetically problematic that breaks is the forward assist. Now, I think this is more like a fluke, but as you see here, this is actually a real steel forward assist. It's because it's very difficult to replace the original one, since WE doesn't really have any of the teardrop forward assist that's historically accurate to this model. They usually just sell the recent more rounded one that you'll find the button shaped one that you'll find on the newer M4s. So that's why you'll see this one here, and that's why you'll notice that's being held together by this white staple as the pin. Since the real steel version, I made another video about this a while ago too, but the real steel one just doesn't quite fit the original, and you can't quite find the original WE to replace this. In the end, I kind of got tired of it. I was wondering, well, what if I just bought the original WE button combination? Since this gun is anyway moving towards the direction of an M733 model anyway, rather than the original XM177. So in that model, they use the rounded forward assist. Unfortunately, the AEG model is quite different. The AEG button that I bought by mistake actually turns out it's not functional. It doesn't have pin on it so that when you push on it, it's just a flat surface, so it's not going to push the bolt forward. Not that it really matters because you don't really need. You can always cycle to push the bolt forward another way. And in fact, the real steel version, a lot of folks will actually debate whether that forward assist is helpful or it's really just a jam enhancer, right? Because if the bolt won't go into battery, should you really be jamming it in there, or should you try to take the time to clear it, before you push it in there? But anyway, that part is if that part breaks, it just looks cosmetically ugly, and it's very hard to find a good part for it. So now it's just really, when I put the AEG version in, it's the round one, so it's not historically accurate, but it doesn't move either. So it's kind of, I don't have a great answer for this fix right now. So it's just, and it does not move at all. So that's just one thing to note, and I don't think that's a consistent thing. That's just a random part that will break. All right, now let's move on to the concept of realism. How realistic are these parts? How accurate is it to the original model? What about real steel compatibility, right? So as far as historical inaccuracy, there are going to be some people who debate whether that slip ring right there is supposed to be tapered or not. A lot of folks complain about the bayonet lug, how that's not supposed to be historically accurate on this model. So those are minor things you can kind of do and change yourself. But for the most part, this model seems pretty historically accurate. I did find out one thing, however, that was not considered historically accurate here, though. If you notice back on the rear sight right here, that is correct for the windage adjustment knob. You use a bullet, essentially, the tip of the bullet, to depress the detent and then rotate it to adjust left or right of the windage and shift your point of impact. However, so that part's correct. However, what's not correct, and this is kind of typical of like WE laziness, where they just kind of use one model and copy it, is if you look at the actual flip sights, right, in the rear, you see that O2, right, and that's actually indicating the yardage of 0 to 200. You use the larger aperture for sight for shooting, basically. That's only for the A2 models and upward. The original M16A1 and definitely the XM177 should have used the two sights should have been exactly the same. The only difference in the two sights were that one had a higher adjusted for elevation a little bit more, and the other didn't have as high of elevation. But this case, they used the larger sight and then the peep sight, which is the finer with the smaller aperture. So again, this is not historically accurate for this model. This is the flip peep sight with the different aperture sizes. That is for the M16A2 models and onward. A minor thing, I'm sure you can probably get real steel parts original and then replace them in here. I've never tried it though, so I don't know if those would actually be compatible. But there have been certainly a lot of parts in here that have been compatible to real steel counterparts, such as the buffer spring, the buffer itself, the hand guards. I have not tried the pistol grip, but the pistol grip has been able to change. The rail mount, so you'll notice that I'm mounting a real steel optic on above right there using an A2 rail mount. There's some fitting issues. I had to use some special parts there to like a rubber O-ring to kind of stabilize it a little bit. But for the most part, those are good to go. Other parts that didn't fit maybe are the real steel birdcage flash hiders. I couldn't get those to work because I used different dimensions. But there are quite a few parts that are helpful, and people have been able to use certain parts interchangeably, whereas others fail. So that's potential. Again, I don't know, but I think you can replace those sites. Overall, not too bad in terms of that department for the realism and historical accuracy. The biggest thing, of course, is that there are no Colt trademarks on this model. That is something that people really want to have. However, that's why I like something like the Marui. Love that, right? But you can always remedy that by buying the WE does make. I mean, it's not like officially legal, I suppose, but it's available overseas that you can buy with the Colt trademark that you can import them. The receiver is one thing that's held up after these 10,000 rounds, and I fired it again with the real steel buffer and buffer spring in there, so there's a lot of stressing on that. And the receiver, both the upper and lower receiver, has held up this entire time. Keep in mind though that even though this gun looks very worn, that is an artificial wearing down. I use probably a little bit too much sandpaper to wear it down, but it is, it's fine. I'm sure if I didn't use a sandpaper, it would probably still look like it did when I originally got it. I don't think the whole Cerakote is really necessary. There obviously would be wear and tear, but it's not going to be to the extent in which you see it in this picture. That's more by design. So point being, if you need that trademark with the Colt serial marking, it's possible to get it. And it's probably worth it too, because those receivers can last you a good amount of time. And if you invest in some of that, you can have that for a while. So final thoughts, let's wrap this up. Basically, this gun does pretty well. I think it's for anything that's under $250 for a gas blowback rifle. If you're expecting, maybe some effort to put into some labor and additional further costs in the future, this is a pretty good starter gun, or a gun to invest in, and you can continue to have upgrades as the years go by and as the rounds put more rounds down range. If you're not really into buying extra parts and getting things fixed, and you just want to get it done, get the gun right out of the box, then maybe this is not the one for you. But this is a pretty reasonable price range for the entry to the market. It's better than those lemons, out there, those, cheaper gas blowbacks, but not as good as the high quality end. So this is probably like the lower end tier, I would say, but in the reasonable market range, all right, that it's still like useful. I'm not talking about those other ones that are like, going to break within like, 500 rounds and you're not going to be able to have aftermarket support. So this is the lower tier end, but of the usable category. So overall, not bad. I think this is a really solid gun. This is actually still one of my favorites. I forgot to mention though, I mentioned a lot of the negative stuff, and I think it's still a really great gun. The one thing I forgot to mention though, of course, is that the recoil in this gun, even in the original stock configuration, is just with the propane is just still much more stronger compared to the Marui. So every time when I fire the Marui, and then you switch to this WE, you feel like an increase in kick and recoil. So you always want to go the other way around. Use the Marui first, then go to the WE so you can get the extra recoil. You don't want to do WE first and then switch to the Marui, because then you're like, you don't feel that recoil. It feels a little bit weak. At least that's how I rotate it when I use them. Well, I hope that that was really helpful and that was good information. This is after 4 years and 10,000 rounds later of using this WE XM177. All right, thanks, folks. Have a good one.